Well, it's a challenge. My name's Aidan White. I'm the director of the Ethical Journalism Network, and I want to sort of put a question to Peter, and also to pick up something that Fatima said, which is about the question of the role of media and information.
Right.
I mean, the real sort of challenge, and I'm looking here at the question from crisis to opportunity. There's a massive information crisis. We've just carried out a report in 15 countries on how media have covered the crisis in migration over the past year. And there is a horrifying similarity to the critical problems. One is that in most countries the issue is politically driven, with not too much respect for the facts about the issue itself. Secondly, media themselves are extremely weak in their capacity to report this story and to give the information. You made a joke at the outset about the Daily Mail, but actually this is a very serious question.
Sure.
The massive problem about the lack of credible, reliable, useful information that's available to people. So here's the question. Is it not right that there should be, Peter, a strategic investment in improving the quality of reliable information that's available to civil society? That would include helping media to cover stories that they can't cover. Media that are at the moment are weak, trying to provide resources to give extra space for the voices of migrants, trying to allow for more investment in research and information that will help reliable and useful fact-based information to be made available. Okay. I mean, I think the information crisis you touched on at the end, you're not going to change people's opinion who've got legitimate concerns about migration unless we put before them reliable and useful information.
Okay, now you get one pass here. That was a long, very but fascinating statement and question. I'm not going to group the other three together with this because it'll get too confusing. So, Peter, why don't you take this one first, and then we'll move on to the other three. Don't worry, I have not forgotten you.
Well, first of all, I would say this, and I hope it's not a trite comment. The editorial policy undercuts the suggestion implicit in your question that the media in general actually want to tell the true story. Mm. Certainly, if you look at the media stories here in some of the most popular newspapers, it's quite clear that they will not publish the information. Secondly, I don't know that the money is available. We haven't got the money to give to the camps to feed people. The World Food Programme is underfunded. It's very difficult to get it unless you get it from foundations. Thirdly, although I accept that there's an essential truth in what you're saying, that we have to get the media engaged with proper information, I don't think it's all that impossible or difficult for any half-responsible and capable journalist to use the Google capacity that is available to get the evidence. I mean, there's absolutely bucket loads of evidence that migrants in Europe, in every country in Europe, contribute more fiscally than they take in benefits. There is evidence also available on Google about low unemployment rates. These people come to work rather than to take benefits, but it's not used. Now, we can spoon feed some journalists who may be given the room to express the views, but I'm not all that confident that there will be many places that will do it. I mean, Channel 4 is an honourable exception, in my view, where they've tried to have consistent and positive and constructive debate. But I think
the evidence is used. It's just not heard. It's not heard. It's not put in the headlines. It's just that is, and not even in our headlines. Yeah. We don't put positive stuff in the headlines. It is a real problem. But I agree with you. It's something that needs to be addressed because it informs the political landscape that allows parties or leaders, to thrive in this climate of fear and paranoia, which the numbers simply don't bear out. Kevin, your question.
Thank you. Peter, what I wanted to ask you, when you were head of the GATT in the Uruguay round, you actually led a very active debate on exactly this set of issues, which has somehow disappeared, actually. I mean, I'm sure there are technical working groups all over the WTO dealing with it, but it's really buried now. But actually, in the intervening period, the demographics and the market realities have changed in a very fundamental way. And, as a European community, we're in the sort of demographic Death Star zone. Italy, Germany have huge replacement rates for the workforce. And yet the economic benefit case seems to get weaker and weaker as the crisis deepens. And and I guess the question is, that if politicians were economically rational actors that were willing to look at the facts, they would take different decisions than they do. But somehow we're collectively failing to get the economic case out there in a way that gains traction. And I just wonder, I'd be interested to hear your reflection on why you think that is. I mean, is it that the environment is so poisonous that it's not going to fly? Is it that we're presenting the wrong type of evidence? Where do we take it, I guess, is the question.
Well, if I can briefly try to answer that. I've been writing recently some thoughts about the process that brought the Uruguay round to a successful conclusion, because some of the arguments, at least, were equally Luddite to the arguments that are being advanced today about the benefits of trade and so on. We had, for a brief moment of time, political leadership which was aligned, at least in the developed countries. This time we don't. We have one leader who I think is going to demonstrate in September that he really is committed in his dying days of presidency of the United States. I think Obama is. I think Merkel has tried to lead. We need a few more. Without that, it's very difficult to bring together the coalition of the willing that will give real impetus to something substantial in terms of reform. I think that the best way of dealing with this from the limited perspective that I have, and I spend a lot of my time trying to do this, is to get on the media, television and radio in particular, and to take every opportunity to do it. But we need a few spokespeople who are going to do that. I mean, I haven't got an answer to what you're saying, but I think we have to speak over the heads of the xenophobes who are so dominant in the debate. And unfortunately, a lot of them are coming out from under stones in the context of the broader debates about Britain's integration at the same time.
It's also interesting. I think at my last count, 5 European countries have got elections in the next 2 years. I mean, some of them, like, France and Germany, Holland, of course, crucial to this debate. I mean, which politician is going to stand up in an election campaign in the next 2 years and say, bring them in? It's just not going to happen unless something fundamentally changes, which it may do, but maybe not. Question over there, please. Lady in the back. Yeah. Sorry. Have you got a microphone? Yeah.
Thanks. Daniela Reale from Save the Children. I'm the lead on Children on the Move. You made a couple of points that I think are really crucial. One is the lack of coordination at the national level and the lack of cooperation at the international level to protect migrants and refugees. And of course, we are seeing it at each step of the way that children make in their travels. Save the Children works pretty much in areas of origin, transit, and destination. And you also mentioned that this is the year of should be the year of multilateralism, which I think is absolutely crucial. And we are seeing that the lack of cooperation across border is affecting children particularly, and impeding the continuum of care that we would like instead to see. So my question for you is, in light of what's happening this year, and also the global compact that we are talking about in view of the meetings and in the UN in September, and in view also of the lack of a kind of governance point of reference to deal with mixed migration flows, I would be very interested to hear from you what is your view on what is the vision going forward, what the solutions to tackle this gap.
Well, first of all, over 40% of the total numbers coming across the Mediterranean are either children or women. And this is a terrible thing to say, but I see the vulnerability of children as a huge potential instrument for getting more general support for the basic values of helping migrants more generally. We had one moment of massive outpouring of concern for migrants, and it was on the occasion when a dead child was found on a beach. And we saw what happened on our televisions the next day in cities in Germany and so on, where everyone was on the street helping. And that just shows the power of what can really be exposed. I mean, it sounds terribly mercenary, is not the right word, but cynical to use terrible events like that to stir up public responses. The compact at the end of the year, hopefully, combined with a number of other initiatives like the Migrants in Crisis Initiative, I have a report, hopefully, that will be coming out before the end of the year on the follow-up to following up the 19th of September meeting, where bluntly principles, normative principles, and ideas in regard to how we need to build cooperation will be exposed. And maybe the conglomeration of all the conferences that we're talking about will ultimately give birth to the development of policies that are important. I'll finally conclude by making this point, and it's coming back to the WTO experience. When I was appointed to this job, I was called into the office of the American permanent representative of the UN, who of course is a member of the cabinet of the US, who was John Bolton. And he said to me, forget it. Migration is a matter of national sovereignty. There is no way we are going to agree to any international rules or responsibilities. We're out of this. Shortly afterwards, or sometime afterwards, the administration changed. There was an immediate embracing by Samantha Power, the, dare I say it with modesty, the Irish permanent representative, but now an American citizen and US representative, and everything changed. So moments change. And it was the same with the WTO, because we were told that Congress would never agree, as they had failed to agree in 1949, on the creation of an international trade organization, which is the reason why the GATT system was created, because they couldn't have a Bretton Woods institution dealing with trade. Government changed, and Clinton was absolutely up for it. And I remember, it's a useless anecdote, but I like telling it, the first time I met Mickey Cantor, who was their minister at the time, we went for dinner in Brussels, and he said, look, we and the Europeans are agreed, you should take this job. And I said, why should I? You've spent 7 years mucking around with the Uruguay round, you've never agreed to anything, just like migration. And he said, not a very pleasant thought, he said, look into my eyes, he said. I'm telling you that this president of the United States knows that you don't go down in history for failing to reach an agreement on a difficult matter. We want an agreement. Now, the president of the United States is important in this context, because his embracing of the 19th of September is, to my mind, an important signal that this president wants to do something. And at the end of the day, you need the big guys who are actually going to deliver, if we're going to deliver for children or anyone else, something that is game-changing or close to it. So I feel that there is some impetus there to make movement.
Which is great because Donald Trump's on the line, Peter. He wants to have a chat with you about that. Okay, next question. Yes, gentleman with the glasses.
This is a question for Peter or anyone else who wishes to answer it. I'm just wondering if the 3 billion euros to Turkey, whether or not it's immoral or illegal, it would be effective. And second of all, your views on the wisdom of farming out border security to Turkey, which has dubious human rights abuses. I know that we used to do it to Libya when Gaddafi was in power, and it wasn't ideal.
Well, I'll be very brief for once. I'm not going to comment on Turkey's position on human rights issues. It's not in my area of competence, and it would be wrong for me to do so. On the refugee issue, I think Turkey has been excellent relative to many others. It has 2.6 million migrants. It has said, even in the current appalling crisis, that if push comes to shove, it will keep its borders open. It is giving working permits to people to work. It is providing, and I've been there and I've seen it, it's providing education and health facilities. So I think Turkey is playing a much more responsible role than many others in this crisis. That's all I would say.
Okay. That wing of the... no, I'm sorry. You've all had your chance over there. We're now going to swing around to this part of the room. Okay, you haven't been ignored. Please, you first. In the front row, yeah.
Thank you. Sheila Page, ODI.
Just one person, the blind.
I wanted to follow up the point that's been made by a couple of people of trying to get, well, frankly, people like us, the NGOs and ODIs, to produce a message. But I'm not still quite sure what message you could agree on. I mean, on trade, we actually had a portfolio of messages. We had the ones for the business, we had the ones for the NGOs, we had the ones for the development, and so on. But is it possible to produce a set of messages in that sense for migration? I mean, Martha's point was that we should look at the fact that when her Eritreans start out from Eritrea, they're not looking to come here or to any place really beyond perhaps the Sudan. But isn't the message better that they are looking to do better for themselves, which may involve migration within Eritrea, which may involve migration to a neighbor, which may involve getting training of some other sort? So put the emphasis there on choice. And that would then fit in with a message on the business side, parallel to the one for trade, of once they get here, they're very useful. But don't we need to think a little more carefully about a coherent set? Thank you.
Arthur, do you want to take this on? Actually, hang on a second. Just let's group them together, because I think this might also be the one trick to get everyone to ask really short questions. Okay. So, gentleman with the red tie, and then, yeah. So, quickly.
Mattia Toaldo from ECFR. I don't know if you heard about the plan floated by the Dutch presidency of the EU. I think the author now has been exiled to Canada. But basically, the plan had two sides. The first one was a massive EU resettlement of 250,000, and the second part was basically the pushback against those not falling into the resettlement plan. Do you think we need to have these two sides in order to have a resettlement plan in the EU?
To have what side?
These two sides, the resettlement and also the pushbacks against those who
Okay.
do not fall.
Then, yep, over there, back.
John Metcalf, British Association of Social Workers. I should like to raise the issue of leadership and sport. Many, many years ago, I was involved in a refugee initiative called World Refugee Year. That was 1960. The point I want to make is that many of us were inspired by great sportsmen of that time, Roger Bannister and Christopher Chataway, who, as young people, we greatly admired. Now, football, at least, has a great influence in this country. And what I'd like to suggest is that perhaps a significant sportsman or football manager might come out and say, come on, help the refugees. We've kicked, or we hope we've kicked racism out of football. Let's see if we can do something about refugees.
Okay, great. Fantastic. And then, gentleman there, you need to move the microphone
Yes.
over. Yeah, there we go.
Gentleman here.
Yes, in the front. Just in the front row. There we go.
Here.
Yeah, there we go. And then we have our cluster of four.
Sorry. My name is Martin Barber. I'm a retired official of the UN. Talking about the language used by political leaders, I wanted to ask Mr. Sutherland whether you don't think it's equally important for political leaders who have good intentions to be careful about their language, as with the political leaders who don't have such good intentions. And in this context, would you agree with Paul Collier that your hero, Angela Merkel, may have been guilty of breaching the rule that thou shalt not tempt? I'll repeat that because of the cough. The breaching the rule of thou shalt not tempt. And in that context, of course, her leadership has inspired moral values, but do you think it might have something to do with the declining population in Germany as well?
Okay. So there's just 4 rather different issues here. Peter, why don't you kick off in whatever order
I'm going
you
to be,
can.
this time I promise I'll be short. Coherent presentation, absolutely agree. But I also think that the only people who can really put this together are the NGO community, funnily enough. The reality is, I know now how the UN works. It does a lot of good work. But this isn't its strong suit. You guys have to do it. I mean, that's the reality of it. Leadership at sport and I completely agree with you. Football should be very ripe territory for this because so many of the top stars are themselves migrants. I agree with you. Careful with language. I agree. Collier is a man who I greatly respect. He knows a hell of a lot more about it than I do. Having said that, I don't agree with them about this. I mean, this pull factor, and that Mrs. Merkel was guilty of a pull factor by saying that she was going to be as generous and the Germans would be as generous as they were intending to be. I think it was an admirable attempt to lead everyone else. They didn't follow. If they had followed, Germany wouldn't have been isolated, and she wouldn't be now blamed, as I have seen in Germany, where her own constituents are saying, why are we the idiots who are the only ones who are prepared to take on when what we have taken on? What about country X? And it was put to me in one audience, country X wasn't very far from where I'm sitting now. And that to my mind is, the other point is on this pull factor. I seem to remember one well-known politician making the case, incredibly, that saving lives in the Mediterranean was a pull factor. I mean,
Also not too far from where we're sitting right now.
I could be correct. And I mean, that to my mind is just so outrageous that comment could be made, that we should let people drown in terms of putting other people off. I mean, how can one argue that? Now, I've written down 250,000 pushbacks, and I can't remember what the question was about the pushback.
No, 250,000 is the resettlement by the Dutch. Do we have to have also pushbacks in order to have...
I think we do, in the end of the day. I don't see... I think Europe has to start... I'm not sure that I've fully understand the question, so I may be wrong here. But I think that the European Union and its potential demise, which I think actually is an excessive expression of what is likely to flow, even from a worst case scenario in regard to migration. But I think that there has to be significant pushback, if this is the question, against the countries who have failed to recognize that part of their obligation as members of the European Union is to embrace solidarity as a principle. Why the hell, as I said earlier, should the Greeks be left carrying the can here, just because they happen to be located on the Mediterranean? I think it's utterly unacceptable. And I think it's unacceptable for prime ministers of a number of countries in Europe to deny the basic principles of the equality of man and the dignity of the human person, which are at the core of the values of what Europe is about. And that's what they're doing. That's what they've done in expressing racist views in regard to migrants.
Okay, Fatima, Fatima first. Would you like to weigh in this, and then Marta as well? And then we've got a round for one more round of questions.
I'm just coming back for the civil society and the role of this issue, actually. What you have said, I'm from the Netherlands, and yeah, what Dutch is doing is not good, actually. It's not good. And I think that the civil society has to come, and especially the civil society based in the Netherlands, has to come some negotiation with the government. And I have been actually last week with the government, and what they are doing is we are promoting to keep the refugees there where they are. Like Sudan, we are going to keep negotiate with the Sudan government that they keep the refugees there. And there was no negotiation with the civil society. It was only consultation. And I think we have to push with the government and further more organize it to discuss with the European Union, and that is not the case actually. We, as a European civil society organizations, we are not good organized to push with the European Union just to do things what we are thinking actually. So I think we have to take the initiative to do something with that and with that right. European Union, and especially in the Netherlands, which is leading 6 months from January up to June. And that is what I said. We have to come on options and take our responsibility to do something and advise and be engaged with that issue.
Okay.
Yeah. And the media actually is, like what you have said, media is very, very important. And I think it is also good to have a role to show the good opportunity and the positive things of the migrant. You have said there is a lot of evidence base, but it's not coming out, it's not published. And I think the mostly commercial media needs to be engaged actually, and we need some people who can take the key role to show that evidence base of the contribution right. of diaspora.
Okay.
Yeah.
Marta.
So to Sheila's question, and of course this is, we think about that day in and day out, and my feeling is that this is somewhat a bit different. We need a more creative, perhaps a more daring approach to get these messages right. Coherence, yes, you're right, and in fact around issues of decision making, I think there is a lot of potential for coherence, but also to try, for example, to bring together conversations that are typically apart about the benefits for all, the benefits for migrants and the benefits from so-called recipients community. When it comes, for example, to the economic argument, they tend to remain so separate that I think we fail to make the most of it. It's not enough, though, and there are a couple of things which are also a little bit unknown for the likes of us, and where also maybe us as a think tank can also, try out different things. One is this is engaging with the public opinion. I mean, we had a taster of that when it comes to aid, right? And and the perception of our aid. This is the same and worse. We are confronting a very difficult moment when it comes to having making progress with public opinions and confronting fears and feelings with facts and well-crafted messages is complicated, and we are learning our way. One way we're trying is also with different means, different languages and different kinds of production and engagement. I also think that there is something to be done about the myths and what's wrong in this debate that needs to be done, that needs to be unveiled. I mean, this issue that the policies that are being pursued in Europe are not going to work. I mean, these politicians might win the elections next year, but it's not going to last long, because people will continue to move, and having an open camp in Greece is not going to be look good for any politicians soon enough. So I think there is also more of a political engagement needed around the nature of policy making and why it doesn't work. So it's a combination. Coherence is one element, the evidence-based sort of paradigm is one element, but it needs more. And we are on a learning journey there, but we welcome also collaborations on that.
Okay. Now we really have to crack through this is the last cluster of 4 questions. Do I see 4 hands? Okay. You had your hand up earlier, so we'll start with you, then you, and then you, and then you. Excellent. But keep it quick, please, because we only have 4 minutes left, according to this clock. Yeah. Do we have a mic? I'm asking you.
They're stopping me from asking a question.
They are?
I can. Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Adrian Hewitt, I'm also from ODI, I'm afraid. I'm going to ask a European question, and so it's inevitably going to be directed at Peter Sutherland, but everybody else on the panel is from a different European country, so let's hope they can all reply. It's triggered by Peter Sutherland's correct suggestion, I believe, at the beginning of his speech, that the solution to a lot of this is integration. But let's look at our country and our immediate neighbours briefly. What are the different styles of integration? In Britain, it's multiculturalism. It's been quite successful in that respect. In France, our immediate neighbour, multiculturalism is anathema because of the Republican tradition. In Ireland, if you compare not just Britain and Ireland, if you compare England and Ireland, the things are different because of Northern Ireland. So culture is very, very important.
What's the question?
I'll wind up now because I was going to talk about Germany, but I mean, Germany, all the time I was growing up, for decades, had a Gastarbeiter system. Most of those Gastarbeiter.
Okay, but what is the question? Come on, we're running out of time.
Okay, so how does Europe, with all this diversity, successfully get to a single, if that's the way, a single integration system?
Okay, excellent. Oh, that's question one. Where was question two? Over there? Over there.
Thank you. I have 3 quick points. The first is I think there's this fundamental tendency in Europe to rally the kind of mainstream parties and try to keep the bad guys out, and I think it's not working. So why don't we let them come into positions of powers? Let the Front National take over certain arrondissement, how do you call this in France? The states. I don't see the strategy working. You know, in Germany they don't want to have them on the podium, the AfD, when they're discussing. It's not working. They're on the ballot, so let them be on the podium. Engage with these guys. I think it's a real mistake to try to keep them apart. Second point is I think we really need to look bigger. So, you know, Europe and Africa are tied together at the hip. Going forward, Europe will need labor. We need to look at it in a bigger picture. We need to articulate. I think people are fearful because the cake's getting smaller, right? Our resources are limited, the planet's limited, we have to redistribute. There's all these poor peoples that want to take our wealth from us. And so this is the bigger picture. And I think unless we speak to that, we're not going to address these fundamental fears and perception issues. It's not going to be done with evidence. Last point, and this goes to civil society, I think there are very concrete ways in which civil society should offer its help. One is private sponsorship, to say we're going to take these people, we're going to make sure they integrate, we're the established communities. The other is diaspora contributions, to say, hey, we're keeping Somalia from completely collapsing. It's because of us that these guys are not coming, because we keep these families alive down there. And I think these points you really need to articulate very strongly.
Okay, great. We got a statement, but not a question, so that's okay. Very interesting. Okay, man at the back there. There we go.
Hi, Gonzalo Van Hool from Por Causa Foundation in Spain. Yeah. My question is very quick. It's about the development community here. I believe that the ODI is an exception in a landscape where the large developing NGOs are nowhere to be seen in these debates, and they have been merely reactive to the current crisis. What is the role that you see for the large development institutions in these debates?
Okay, very good. And then you get the final question.
My name's Haja. I work at the African Foundation for Development and ADEPT platform. My question is regarding African states. I'm from Mali, and at the moment there's about 400 families, Syrian families, settling in northern Mali. Is there any initiative to support African states coping now with this Syrian refugee crisis?
Okay. Okay, great. That's it. Thank you very much. Why don't you start off, Peter, and then we'll move along the panel.
Sarah? I agree with everything you said. That's CNDU. But I sincerely do, as you know. Different forms of integration. My attitude to that is there's no way we should try to have a harmonized European integration policy. There are different approaches. I'm no expert on it, between assimilation or multiculturalism or whatever. I could give you hours of argument both ways. I believe probably in multiculturalism significantly, but that's for the nation state. If the European Union tried to get involved in having a harmonized integration policy, it's dead in the water whether it's a good idea or not. Mali, of course, all states that are underdeveloped countries, and Mali is a classic example, and may in fact be part of the Sahel area, which will be the next source of enormous numbers of migrants. Of course it should be helped. And I make a final point, which is not relevant to any of the questions. One of the big issues in dealing with this is the total incoherence of national policy because lack of cooperation between different government departments. The ball is usually carried by the border control agencies who are being pressurized by government to reduce the numbers of people who are coming in, but have no direct relationship with any of the other policy areas. The development people initially had the view, well, migration is proof of a failure of development, therefore we're not in favor of it, even though the remittances argument and various others prove that migration is vital for development. Lastly, on that remittances point, and I've spoken to about 100 countries, I would say, on this, none of the departments of finance are brought into this argument at all. It's grabbed by foreign affairs, by justice and home affairs, and by development. And nobody has bothered to ask the exchequers, have you spoken to your own banks about the charges that you impose on remittance transfer? The World Bank ultimately took it up and started to do this. So it's about time we had holistic policy at a national level.
Okay. Marta.
Let me take Gonzalo's question about should development organization do more. Yes, but with a good dose of realism. And the answer is they can do more, but it cannot be about development as such. This is a year into this adventure, what I'm convinced about. I mean, there's lots of potential. Human mobility, one of the best, it's probably the best way to reduce poverty worldwide. The evidence is clear. There are lots of pitfalls. Send them aid and they will not come. The reality is that, as Peter just said, there is a need to make this a debate across governments and across functions. And the temptation to make this a narrow international development stroke aid issues, or for that matter, humanitarian issues. So the risks are great. So we need to. So that's I guess why there are not many of us, because it requires getting outside of the comfort zone and actually engaging with debates and with actors and with disciplines that are not what we normally do. And this is why it's so exciting, but that's why also why is a bit limited.
No, I'm just going to go back what Sarah said. The civil society organization is and diaspora actually. The contribution of diaspora is actually not enlightened or sended. So I think it is what we need is, as you have said, we have to come out and say that's our contribution, and we need to be engaged. Now, you can do everything, but if you are not engaged, you cannot say anything. So what we need to have is organized, platforms. We have now civil society days for GFMD, who has the action plans for 5 years. But we need also not only internationally, but nationally, locally, and regionally. And also, we have to be also have a consultation with our origin countries, which is also very, very important, because that's sometimes not the case, because some of the diaspora come from political refugee and they have not linked with those countries. What we need is to have a consultation or dialogue with the host country and origin country and national and international to show what is the contribution of diaspora and to be also involved politically, economically, and socially. So I do agree with you, and we need organized community, not only internationally, but also locally and nationally.
Okay, great. Yeah. Now, we've actually come to the end. I'm going to get to ask one little question at the end. I'm going to ask Peter this question. If you, and again, we'll keep the answer short, and hopefully the question too. If you found yourself in a closed room with one of these political leaders looking for re-election this year, knowing full well that the political headwinds are against migrants and refugees and multiculturalism and all that, what would you say to them?
I'd ask him a simple question. What's he in politics for? If he's in politics because he has beliefs, how can he do other than take a constructive engagement with this issue? If he's in it for political survival, well, good luck. Goodbye. I've no interest in it.
But the room is locked and you're not getting out. Okay. To all of you, thank you very much indeed. Yes, go on.
One thing which is very, very important is also vote of the diaspora. For example, the the election is coming from the Netherlands, for example. The diaspora or migrants are not aware their contribution, the vote is, and where they can
so
be.
They need to feel more empowered about what they can actually
I think
do.
if they are aware where they have the power of the diaspora, they can be actually negotiate with the political partner. But that is not the case. So we need to be organized actually.
All right. Fatuma Farah, Marta Foresti, Peter Sutherland, thank you very much indeed. The title, of course, is From Crisis to Opportunity. I think what we've seen today is there's a huge opportunity for more crisis, but hopefully also an opportunity for opportunity. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Thanks.